Benny Hill's career spanned decades. His blend of slapstick and innuendo had endeared him to millions. He was a cult figure in the United States and Japan, although his television show in Britain had been dropped after criticism that his style was sexist.
Benny Hill was once the king of British comedy, with millions tuning in to The Benny Hill Show for its fast-paced slapstick and unforgettable chase scenes. But what happens when a style that once dominated television suddenly feels out of place? One sketch, meant to be harmless fun, sparked a national scandal that changed everything. This lost scene didn't just miss the mark. It became the defining symbol of a cultural shift that would end Hill's reign and reshape the future of comedy itself. The fall of a comedy icon. Benny Hill once dominated television with a style of comedy that felt universal, fast, physical, and easy to laugh at. But by the late stages of his career, that same formula began to clash with a world that had changed. What audiences once saw as harmless fun started to feel uncomfortable, even outdated. Beneath the laughter, a quiet tension had been building for years. The turning point came with a single controversial sketch, one that didn't just miss the mark, but ignited a wider debate. Critics, viewers, and cultural commentators quickly seized on it as an example of everything wrong with Hill's style. Suddenly, The Benny Hill Show was no longer just entertainment. It became a symbol in a much larger conversation about sexism, representation, and what should be acceptable on primetime television. This backlash didn't appear overnight. For years, Hill's signature chase scenes, often involving women in revealing outfits being pursued for laughs, had been widely accepted. Fans saw them as playful and exaggerated, but attitudes were shifting. A growing number of voices began to question whether these portrayals reduced women to objects, turning them into props rather than participants in the joke. When the controversial beauty pageant sketch aired, it struck a nerve. What was intended as silly humor instead felt tone-deaf to a changing audience. The laughter faded, replaced by criticism and discomfort. Media coverage intensified the reaction, while feminist groups and younger comedians pointed to the sketch as proof that this kind of comedy no longer belonged in a modern landscape. In that moment, Hill's work stopped being judged purely on laughs. It was being measured against evolving cultural values. And while many still defended him, the divide was clear. The fall of Benny Hill wasn't caused by one sketch alone, but that moment exposed a deeper truth. Comedy doesn't exist in a vacuum. It changes with the audience, and when it doesn't, even the biggest icons can find themselves left behind. The timing of Hill's fall was no coincidence. The incident occurred during a time when people were analyzing both media representation and gender roles throughout society. The standards of one decade became offensive to people in another decade, which created a conflict between established traditions and current societal practices. Hill's comedy, which originated from earlier periods, encountered difficulties in adapting to the modern entertainment landscape. His international audience maintained their support for him through increasing backlash, which demonstrates how his artistic works created a complicated legacy. Benny Hill found himself confused about the growing public dispute that developed behind the scenes of his productions. The perfectionist and private man who worked as a director did not comprehend how shifts in culture had changed audience expectations. He maintained his successful music style from earlier times because he remained unaware of current musical trends. The creators of this conflict against existing cultural norms produced a powerful clash. Multiple factions placed increasing pressure on the situation because media critics, broadcasting standards, activists, and new comedians considered Hill's humor to be outdated and harmful. The British comedy scene, which he had controlled for many years, started facing its first major threat. The show would soon get cancelled, but its impact would last much longer than the duration of one television show. Benny Hill's downfall downfall extended beyond the impact of one particular scene. The entertainment industry needed to change its content because the performance showed how humor and social values collided with each other. The initial comedic display of slapstick humor evolved into a major cultural transformation that established new boundaries for what could be shown at theaters. The comedy that defined Benny Hill's career began in the simplest of settings, a reflection of humble beginnings and a sharp eye for human nature. Benny Hill's rise to stardom. Alfred Hawthorne Hill, better known as Benny Hill, was born in Southampton, England, in the mid-1920s. His exact birth year is debated, with sources citing both 1924 and 1925. But what is clear is that he came from modest roots. Unlike many entertainers who come from show business families, Benny's father operated a surgical instrument store, a far cry from the bright lights of comedy stages. However, comedy was in Hill's blood, thanks to his grandfather, who had once been a circus clown. Before stepping into the spotlight, Benny lived an ordinary life, holding down various everyday jobs. He worked as a milkman, delivered groceries, drove cars, and even played drums, blending into the fabric of working-class Britain. These early experiences, while not glamorous, sharpened his ability to observe people's quirks and everyday behaviors. It was this skill of keen observation that would later form the foundation of his unique comedic style, allowing him to find humor in the mundane. World War II marked a turning point in Benny's life. Serving in the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, he fixed engines and vehicles, later taking on roles as a driver and searchlight operator. Yet it was during his time in the Combined Services Entertainment Troupe that Benny found his true calling. Performing for soldiers weary from battle, he realized comedy wasn't just about laughs. It was a much-needed relief and a vital morale booster. This period fueled his passion and polished his performance skills. The British entertainment tradition, which combined slapstick with sharp wit, became the main inspiration for Benny after World War II. He respected British traditions more because he wanted to study different theatrical traditions. Jack Benny, an American radio comedian who mastered backtiming and silence as a joke element, made a strong impression on him. The stage name Benny, which Alfred Hill used as a tribute to his inspiration, created success through a character who could perform physical comedy while executing precise comic timing, which made him suitable for the developing television medium. Benny achieved his first moment of fame through his 1947 radio performance on Variety Bandbox. Although his physical comedy needed better visual representation, the new and exciting television medium of the early 1950s served as an ideal platform for Benny to display his dynamic physical demonstrations together with his facial expressions. The Benny Hill Show first appeared on the BBC in 1955, which showcased fast-paced sketches together with comedic songs and unusual characters. Benny Hill extended his performance abilities across all artistic fields. In 1964, he surprised critics by performing as Nick Bottom in a television adaptation of Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. His performance demonstrated his acting abilities beyond comedy, which helped him achieve greater recognition in the industry. The combination of his various skills allowed Benny to establish a diverse career path, which increased his popularity while making him a vital part of British show business. Benny Hill reached international fame through his character development throughout the show. The traditional principles of the past faced their greatest challenge when society began to doubt its established beliefs. Benny's comedy, with its signature visuals and unforgettable characters, made his show a global sensation whose reach crossed language and culture. The signature style and popularity. Benny Hill's comedy was immediately recognizable for its distinctive blend of slapstick, wild facial expressions, and fast-paced sketches. His talent for physical humor was second to none, turning ordinary situations into a whirlwind of chaos and laughter. His characters, whether bumbling or absurdly confident, were surreal yet relatable, offering a unique kind of entertainment that appealed across generations. These elements combined to create a comedic formula that was both fast and funny, unlike anything else on television at the time. One of the most iconic features of The Benny Hill Show was the chase scene that closed every episode, set to the unmistakable tune of Yakety Sax. These sequences were filmed using undercranked cameras to speed up the action, making Benny run at comic high speed as he was pursued by a cast of characters, including policemen, nurses, and young women. These frantic chases, teetering on the edge of slapstick madness, became synonymous with Benny Hill and instantly recognizable around the globe. Benny's supporting cast added to the charm. Characters like Fred Scuttle, the stuttering man who always struggled to speak properly, and Jackie Wright, the short, bald man subjected to Benny's playful head taps, became beloved by audiences. Their recurring appearances gave the show a consistent family feeling, a stable anchor amid the rapid-fire sketches. This helped build a connection with viewers who came to expect certain gags and look forward to familiar faces. The show's move to Thames Television in 1969 marked a new era. Transitioning from short, weekly broadcasts to hour-long specials gave Benny a bigger budget to play with. This extra space allowed for more elaborate and ambitious production, not just slapstick, but musical numbers and elaborate parodies. These specials became a powerhouse of entertainment, pushing the boundaries of what sketch comedy could achieve on television. International appeal was a major part of Benny's success. The universal language of slapstick meant his humor didn't need translation. By the 1970s, The Benny Hill Show was sold to more than 140 countries, turning a British comedian into a global star. His ability to communicate comedy without words was a significant reason his show resonated so widely, cutting across cultural and linguistic divides. At its peak in 1971, the show attracted an audience of over 21 million viewers in the UK alone, a staggering figure that cemented Benny's place in television history. That same year, his comedy song, Ernie, the fastest milkman in the West, topped the UK charts at Christmas, highlighting his crossover appeal as a performer. It wasn't just a show, it was a cultural phenomenon. Yet even in the height of that popularity, seeds of controversy were quietly beginning to sprout. The addition of the Hills Angels, a troupe of dancers who added sparkle with their routines in the 1980s, introduced new critiques. As the era changed, so did how the public saw Benny's style, setting the stage for the cultural clashes that would define his final years in the spotlight. Behind the laughter and run-ins lay a comedy form caught between the past and the future, beloved by many, yet increasingly questioned by others. Though Benny Hill's joyously irreverent style brought him immense fame, the world around him was shifting toward a very different kind of humor and sensibility, cultural backlash, and changing attitudes. By the 1980s, the world around Benny Hill had changed, and so had comedy. What once felt like harmless fun in The Benny Hill Show began clashing with evolving social values. His signature slapstick chases and suggestive humor came under scrutiny, with critics arguing they relied too heavily on stereotypes, especially in the portrayal of women. This backlash had been building for years. Feminist groups, media watchdogs, and a new generation of comedians questioned recurring scenes where women appeared as silent props rather than active participants. What audiences once laughed at was now being viewed through a more critical lens as awareness around gender dynamics grew. At the same time, comedy itself was shifting. Alternative comedians introduced sharper, more socially aware humor that challenged norms instead of reinforcing them. In contrast, Hill's style began to feel tied to a past era. One of the most vocal critics was Ben Elton, who argued that Hill's routines were not just outdated, but harmful. He believed repeated portrayals of women as objects contributed to real-world disrespect. His criticism helped spark a wider public debate, turning Hill into a symbol of a larger cultural divide. By the late 1980s, the pressure was undeniable. What once united audiences in laughter had become a source of controversy, showing how quickly comedy can fall out of step with the world around it. Hill received strong support from dedicated defenders. Fans considered his work to be fun entertainment, which provided them with a way to escape reality and thus should not face political evaluation. They maintained that comedy should exist as an unrestrained space that allows performers to create exaggerated, humorous content instead of facing ethical assessment. The situation had reached a new phase because all power had shifted away from the original state. The number of complaints rose while broadcasting rules became stricter. The discussion expanded beyond comedy to address matters of responsible content creation and accurate representation. What once entertained millions now creates discomfort for numerous people. Hill appeared to be isolated from the extent of the public reaction, which was directed against him. Hill, who preferred to work in silence, achieved his successful comedy routine through his dedication to his craft. But he failed to recognize that the audience had transformed into something entirely different. The late 1980s brought mounting pressure, which became impossible to ignore. Hill's comedy style faced difficulties in adapting to the new cultural conditions because the gap between traditional practices and modern innovations had become wider. Even in the twilight of his career, it wasn't a slow fade. It was one explosive moment, a sketch so controversial it became the symbol of everything critics feared: the lost scene and public outcry. The moment that helped unravel Benny Hill's comedy empire came from what seemed like a routine sketch, a parody of a beauty pageant. On the surface, it followed his familiar formula: exaggerated characters, playful chaos, and cheeky humor. But this time, something felt different. What once passed as harmless fun now crossed an unspoken cultural line. The sketch featured contestants in revealing outfits, positioned less as comedic participants and more as visual props. Hill, playing the flirtatious host, delivered suggestive jokes, while other male characters acted foolishly around them. In earlier years, this dynamic had been accepted as light entertainment, but by the late 1980s, audiences were beginning to see it differently. The women weren't part of the joke, they were the joke. And that shift in perception changed everything. The turning point came with a supposed punchline involving one of the contestants. Instead of landing as funny, it felt uncomfortable and mean-spirited. The laughter the show depended on was replaced by silence and criticism. For many viewers, this wasn't just a misstep. It was proof that Hill's style of comedy no longer fit the times. The backlash was immediate. Media outlets debated whether such content still belonged on television. Viewers flooded broadcasters with complaints, re-examining a show they had once loved without question. Feminist groups pointed to the sketch as a clear example of how entertainment continued to objectify women. What had once been dismissed as playful was now seen as outdated and harmful. All the other comedians participated in the joke. The new generation of performers from alternative comedy shows delivered their direct attack against Hill's artistic achievements. The discussion moved away from assessing the sketch's humor value toward evaluating its ethical implications. The public dispute spread beyond its initial scene because it represented a major change in audience expectations for comedic performances. Hill stayed unaware of the escalating situation because he operated from backstage. His meticulous nature made him examine the sketch as another comedy piece, which resembled his successful material. The audience had transformed itself into a new group, which rendered all attempts to connect with them completely unfeasible. The Benny Hill Show ended its 21-year broadcast history when Thames Television stopped airing the program in 1989. His television work had achieved worldwide success, but his British television career ended suddenly. This lost scene became more than a forgotten sketch. It represented the point when comedy and culture first encountered each other, and a unifying style that had brought millions together started to fall behind modern society. The backlash that haunted Benny Hill's final years was as much about a changing world as it was about a single comedian's refusal to change with it. Legacy and final years. Benny Hill was once one of television's biggest names, with The Benny Hill Show dominating screens worldwide. But behind the laughter, something was shifting. The humor that had entertained audiences for decades began to clash with changing social values, and what once felt harmless started to feel uncomfortable, even controversial. The turning point came with a single sketch that many believe changed everything. It wasn't just a joke that failed. It triggered outrage. Critics, viewers, and commentators saw it as a symbol of a deeper problem in Hill's comedy. Suddenly, a show that had long been a staple of entertainment became the center of debates about sexism, objectification, and what should be acceptable on primetime television. The signature style of Hill for many years included chase scenes, which featured women dressed in revealing outfits as part of the comedic element. Fans saw these moments as playful and exaggerated. But over time, more voices began to question whether these portrayals were appropriate. Critics demonstrated that the humor presented women as objects, which maintained traditional stereotypes instead of representing modern cultural developments. The backlash began to develop during a period of several years, which ended with people gaining a greater understanding of media representation and respect. The controversial beauty pageant sketch pushed everything into the spotlight. The presentation, which was intended to be humorous, brought about serious criticism, which replaced the audience's laughter. The response from people became extremely powerful because they reacted without delay. The media provided extensive coverage of the issue, while feminist groups expressed their opinions, and a new generation of comedians saw Hill's comedic style as an outdated tradition. Benny Hill turned The Benny Hill Show into a global hit with his slapstick style, but as values changed, his humor faced criticism. A controversial beauty pageant sketch became the tipping point, sparking debate over respect and representation. Despite his success, Hill's legacy remains divided, praised as a pioneer, yet questioned by modern audiences. If you found this insightful, like and subscribe, and don't miss the next story waiting on your screen.